He was sexually abused by his stepfather ever since he was 6 and was violated around his 8th year. His biological father died of a work-related accident, and his mother married this stepfather that she knew from her hometown a few years after. That fatherly figure soon turned out to be an abusive monster that was oh so eager to put his hands on anything that moves. His mother didn't know of the sexual abuse that he was going through because the son was threatened by death of his mother and him if he says anything. He was in an ever worse situation after getting bullied and abused. He was completely suicidal. He was debating on just jumping in front of a semi and end it all multiple times, but his mother was the only reason he didn't want to do it and kept pushing on through it all. He started slowly making a few friends that helped him cope a little. On his 10th, he was violently molested and was left limping after his father went all out on him. He was forced to go to school the day after and was limping from the pain, unable to sit at all, unable to move, but he endured it and shrugged it off as an accident so that no one finds out what happens. He saw what the man can do. He doesn't want his mother hurt or worse because he told on this monster. Even the bullies stopped making fun of him after seeing that he didn't care anymore about what they did to him. More uninterested in bullying an inanimate object than pity, a few older senior students who were a mix of 16 and 18-year-old caught up to what happened and pulled him aside one day to ask what happened. They all sat down and talked. Although they knew what was happening, they merely asked to confirm what's going on. My friend who told them to not spread it as it means life and death to him, and especially his mother, let out all the information out of pure fear from about 5 or 6 behemoths towering around him and years of abuse killing his self-esteem. The seniors were not amused. Not one bit. They were all hell-bent on making this man regret his life choices and make him regret it. They did. They stalked him, cornered him, and afterwards went completely berserk on him. Sodomize him with a multitude of tools, carved child rapist on his back, beat the bejesus out of his testicles to the point where he was quite literally peeing blood, and continued beating him up in the process, and afterwards just to really nail the point in. They didn't want him to die. They wanted him to live and suffer from it. He was rushed to the hospital with both his arms broken on multiple points, eye socket collapsed, and eye heavily damaged, with no chance of repair. Both his testicles were ruptured and are damaged beyond salvation. His anus was ripped to the size of a 22 centimeters ball, and he lost about 70% of his teeth. There was more, but it will take this whole post just to list all the damage dealt. They caught him at the brink of death from all the bleeding and managed to keep him alive somehow. The next day, they told his mom of what happened and what he did to him. She wasn't just filing for divorce. She took everything he ever owned, all the money he made, and afterwards had him put behind bars, with a little birdie that told every inmate inside of what he did. Last he heard of him was that he was being used quite literally as the prison's soap dispenser while in the pen. He didn't die, but he was left with a gape that would make even Hakim Kijo jealous, roaming the streets, shunned by everyone, and they still regularly tell people of who he is and what he did to publicly shame him for what he did, losing him any job possible and barred from many establishments, and was regularly stoned, hissed at, and yelled at to go away like a stray dog. There was no mercy for him. 5 years of child abuse, a lifetime of hell on earth. My friend now is 26 years old, works in a decent place where he is beyond respected, his mother living with him. Still single sadly, but he is now living a better life than what he had when he was a kid. He left the country where all of this happened with his mother and started working and studying, and now lives a more or less easier life, working as a vice principal in the nursery I work in despite his history. TLDR. The man physically and sexually abused my friend for 5 years straight, got more than he ever bargained for, got the beating of a lifetime, prison raped, public shamed, and hobo raised. ADD in DUM. Clearing up where it happened. This happened in Tunisia a long time ago. We didn't have the whole televised horrors of society, but rather it was more or less a large section in the newspapers that people end up reading or seeing. Most of our TV stations, all 2 or 3 of them back then, were heavily regulated and monitored by the government when Ben Ali was in presidency, so it always either shows random Egyptian and Tunisian soap operas, or if it's news, it's mostly good news or political attacks against any opposing side that was against any opposition to Ben Ali or anyone that was under him. Newspapers, on the other hand, were practically free game. They post whatever they want freely as long as they don't attack or offend any governmental bodies, president, cops, unless it has to do with a dirty cop, and especially the president's wife for some reason. Internet was also a rarity. Only a few had it and used it, and it was mostly used for business and communication between family members. Did you know that in the town I was born in they just recently discovered that there's a device called the YU? They only thought that there was only a Y, and that's about it. Insane, right? As much as I'd love to find the newspaper with the story, I can't seem to find it anywhere online, and I doubt he'd have a copy of I either. But I will ask him and see if he has it. But I will definitely see if I can find it because I personally want to see what they've written on the subject. I doubt they'll say anything necessarily bad, but they'll definitely throw some shade subliminally and call it a day.
Next story.
Back in 2019, I had just moved my long-term partner into my house due to a series of poor life choices on his end. It had been a rocky relationship for most of its duration, but I was young and dumb. I believe this was him wanting to commit and truly start our lives. By early 2020, we were engaged. I was a full-time university student, sole caretaker for my mentally disabled mother, and taking care of the house and our pets. He worked a standard 40-hour-a-week, minimum wage job, and refused to help with any aspect of life. I found out on Christmas Day, 2020, he had been unfaithful and had forgotten to tell me. He was planning on leaving me, but had informed everyone except for me because he was failing to secure a new residence. Apparently his fuck buddy didn't like him enough to let him move in. At this point, it was very little love lost, and I expected he would be moving out within the coming weeks. Fast forward 3 entire months, and his search for a living place was non-existent, and he was acting more and more entitled. Clearly by this point, he is an unwelcomed freeloader who has taken up residence in my living room. I was about to secure an eviction notice to get him off my couch. He began swiping Tinder with his phone volume loudly on. I told him to not do that in my presence, as it was highly insensitive to do in my home, and he could do it in private. This continued, so I told him I would sleep with one of his friends. It was said in a moment of anger and was more of an empty threat at the time. However, I am known for seeing goals to their completion. I messaged the guy who was supposedly my ex's best friend and the best man for the wedding. It turns out he didn't even consider my ex a close friend, and my ex had acted similarly terrible to this guy previously as well. We bonded over our terrible experience, hit it off really well in general, and started dating. I was upfront about what the catalyst for me to reach out to him was. After 2 years of dating, we were married April 2nd. He watched me graduate with that bachelor's degree my ex disliked. I'm halfway through my master's, and my husband works in a specialized steady field that supports us. Last I heard, my ex got kicked out of his dad's house, never was able to officially date his side chick, and has not made any choices to better his life.
Next story.
Some background. I, 35M, own a 72 units apartment complex. When I bought it, it was in a good shape, and I spent several million getting all apartments renovated. The rent wasn't increased for any of the tenants, and I made sure that it never went up by more than $50 a year for lease renewals baked into the leases. Shortly after all the renovations were completed, I started the search for a property management company and ultimately settled on one that seemed well aligned with wanting to put the tenants first. As we were doing the contracts, I had my real estate friend also look at them. Between him and my lawyer, they recommended having a clause added in there. The short of it is, If there are any legal actions brought up against me for the apartment complex due to neglect of the property management staff, the property management will be responsible for all those costs and any legal fees incurred. This wasn't added in secret, and the legal team from the property management company agreed, and everything was finalized. They took over the management of the complex a month later. I was fairly hands-off and only visited the site every 3 to 4 months. Other than that, I'd have the monthly updates sent to me by the manager on site. A few months ago, I found out that a couple of the apartments had been left in severe shambles after the tenants moved out, and the cleaning crew we had took care of it. I didn't find out until after the fact that it was not completely accurate, because one of the apartments apparently had a bad roach infestation in the storage closet outside the apartment. After the new tenants moved into that apartment, they brought up the issue to the site manager. In the monthly reporting, the site manager claimed that maintenance staff tried to address with it traps and bug bombs. I didn't think too much of it and left it at that. Next month, the same thing. And the third month, after receiving the monthly report, I called the site manager stating there is a reoccurring issue, and I wanted it taken care of professionally at that point. The month's rent was waived for the tenants in that apartment, and they were put up at a hotel for a week while the issue was to be addressed. Once they returned to their apartment is when the issue started. The site manager, either by mistake or by negligence, didn't communicate with the exterminators the extent or the location of the infestation. Instead of the storage closet, the apartment was fumigated, and after that, the roaches made their way into other apartments in the same building and the nearest building, and the problem got so much worse. The same option was given to all the tenants in that building, waiving the month's rent and putting them up in a hotel for a week while the issue was addressed. They all took that offer up. However, one of the tenants decided to take legal action. While I wasn't happy about it, I understood where they were coming from, having their lives disrupted by something that should have been addressed properly to start. As we were midst negotiating with them during mediations, my lawyer reminded me of the clause with the property management company and suggested we give them what they want. That is where I started my nuclear revenge. I had the rest of the tenants from the 2 impacted buildings be suggested to anonymously that one of the tenants had filed a lawsuit for the damage, and they should do the same by getting in on it. Through the mediation, I pretended to be outraged at the whole matter. The negotiation started at 3 months of free rent, but ultimately we all settled on 1 year of free rent for all those tenants. Overall, that came out to 16 apartments with rent averaging from $1,700 monthly that the property management had to pay for due to the negligence of the site manager, equaling to roughly $325,000 in just the lost rent they had to pay for. And the cherry on top, due to the breach in service for property maintenance, they also have to provide free services for up to 6 months while I seek out a new property management company, costing them an additional $146,000, and still pay for the legal fees on top of that.
Next story.
When I was 6, I was molested by my grandfather, and repeatedly was up until the age of 11. I would typically be sent to his house on weekends, occasionally with my mother staying for visits during the week. Due to my grandma being dead due to cancer, she was never around to witness it, and he would always pressure me to do things with him, and never say anything to anyone about it. I felt filthy and pissed each time it happened, and because I was so young, I couldn't do much to physically stop it. Until Christmas Eve. For Christmas, my mother was visiting my grandfather to celebrate, and due to her being an alcoholic, she was asleep in one of the guest bedrooms. So my grandfather was in the kitchen, cleaning up, and I was watching TV. I then heard a thud in the kitchen and rushed to check on what it was. It was Grandpa, with a face dropped on one side and a numb leg. I quickly asked Grandpa, "What's wrong?" He could only answer in a thick slur, and that's when I knew he was having a stroke. We learned about it in school. We had also learned how to call 911 to save the person, but that wouldn't be necessary. And realizing this, I simply stood up, smiled at him, keeping eye contact, and walked back to the living room to continue watching TV, And then I waited, watching movies, until it hit the mark where it was most likely too late for anything to save him. I then got my mom and told her what was happening in the kitchen. Mom called 911 and stayed with Grandpa until the ambulance came. Mom hopped in the ambulance to follow Grandpa too, while I was sent to the next-door neighbor's house. And he died in the hospital, and up until the funeral I had to play the facade that I was the innocent granddaughter. And to this day, nobody in my family knows what I did.